You want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
You can't handle the truth!
Well, we're giving you the Michigan Sports Truth, the show that is honest, reveals the facts, truth, and statistics, and does not mess around. Follow me, Taylor Phillips, on Twitter at DT2Phillips. Email me at TaylorGatorPhillips14@yahoo.com. Follow Ed Smith on Twitter at EdSmith313, and go to our website at MichiganSportsTruth.com. Also like our Facebook page, The Michigan Sports Truth, and join our Facebook group with the same name. The Michigan Sports Truth podcast on Spreaker is also available on iHeartRadio and SoundCloud. Also a subsidiary of Sports Radio Detroit, thus available on iTunes and Podbean. This podcast is particularly not for entertainment purposes, and the views expressed by the host of this podcast are opinion-based. However, they do not come without facts, research, statistics, and truth, whether other people like it or not, and no matter how harsh or complicated it may be. This is the Michigan Sports Truth, and nothing can ever stop it from being correct.
Welcome to episode 261 on Spreaker. I'm Taylor Phillips along with Buck Gino. You can follow Buck Gino on Twitter at Buck Gino III, as in triple I in Roman numerals. How's it going, BG3?
It's going a lot better than it was Friday night. The Tigers had a nice performance this weekend and came away with 2 wins, so it's always good to talk about. It's a lot easier to talk about those than it is when they're losing.
Yeah, it is. Win or lose, we dissect and analyze the truth, no matter how comfortable or uncomfortable it may be, 100% of the time. Plus, and we're going to talk a lot about Tigers here, plus a little bit of Grand Rapids Griffins hockey, a little bit of Pistons basketball, a little update on the Michigan State Spartans football sexual assault investigation, and some analysis on the Detroit Lions preparing for the NFL draft. But first, we're going to recap the Tigers' week in review.
That one is long gone!
The day before Easter, they got clobbered by the Cleveland Indians at Progressive Field 13-6. Justin Verlander allowed 9 runs. Anibal Sanchez continued to be Anibal Sanchez. Tigers' offense tried to keep up, but their pitching, their lack of they're so ineffective pitching. Really poke the nail inside the coffin there. And then they beat the Indians 4-1 Sunday. Matt Boyd allowed only the 1 run. Let's see, the Capitals just beat the Maple Leafs 2-1 in overtime.
Wow, that was quick.
Yep. Alex Avila, another home run. Miguel Cabrera, the 2-run single. K-Rod only allowed 1 double. That was it. Got the save. And then they went to Tampa Bay on a Tuesday night. Michael Fulmer wasn't his best performance. Got tacked on for 3 runs on 6 hits in 6 innings. And then Brad Ausmus dialed up Kyle Ryan. He gave up the other 2 runs on 3 hits in just a third of an inning. And then the Tigers came back from down 5-1. They were in another 5-1 deficit. That time they came back on a Wednesday night to lead 7-5. They allowed a 6-run in the 7th inning. Justin Wilson pitched a scoreless 8th inning. K-Rod allowed the bases to be filled with nobody out. I believe he got a strikeout afterwards, and then he induced what looked like a ground ball double play, 4-6-3, but But when Jose Iglesias got the throw and tagged the bag at second, he slipped and fell right before he threw to first, and it appeared to be well wide, allowing 2 runs to score. The tying run and the winning run. But half of the fault has to be on K-Rod, but Jose Iglesias naturally kind of messed up. Those things are going to happen, and also in the process, Jose Iglesias got into a collision where he took a knee to his jaw, and later on he had to be put on concussion protocol on the 7-day concussion disabled list, which is not good for the Tigers defensively, despite Iglesias is good on defense, really good on defense, but I think he hurried up a little too much, and that's kind of how he slipped and fell, and which is one thing. Taking a knee to the jaw in a collision is another. But unfortunately for Francisco Rodriguez, that was his second blown save. Just 14 games in at that point of the regular season. Then they got pounded 8-1 by the Tampa Bay Rays. Daniel Norris, 5 runs, 4 earned on 8 hits. That was all. That was all in the story there. And then the Tigers went to Minnesota and lost their 4th straight game, 6-3 to the Minnesota Twins at Target Field. Justin Verlander threw 107 pitches in 5 and change innings. Gave up 4 earned runs on 3 hits. 2 of them given up by Joe Jimenez. One of them on a single and the other on a 3-run home run to Eddie Rosario to give the Twins the 6-3 lead and the win. That instantly put the Twins in the lead and sealed the game at the same time.
Yeah, and also in that game, Miguel Cabrera weaving after the 6th inning, the disastrous 6th inning, that couldn't get any worse. And he was later placed on the DL with a right groin strain.
Yes.
So it didn't look good. It's coming in this weekend, I won't lie. Damn it!
Yeah, even though Cabrera got up to a really terrible, slow start to this season, he's been slowly but surely progressing in his batting average. He kept getting hit after hit. He's got a couple home runs too, but you can see why Cabrera's injury was more detrimental than it could have been at the very start of the season. And then we go to Saturday's game, afternoon game, where the Tigers won 5-4. Matt Boyd was dueling against Adalberto Mejia. It was a close game the whole way through, but we're gonna go ahead and touch on what transpired between Matt Boyd and Miguel Sano. It all started when Jacoby Jones got hit in the mouth with the pitch, and Jacoby Jones's mouth was bleeding. And then Matt Boyd threw a sizzling fastball right behind Miguel Sano's legs, and Sano kind of went after him, but didn't charge the mound, literally. He was just giving Boyd some choice words. And then when James McCann tried to mediate both Boyd and Sano, try to hold Sano back. Sano punched McCann right below the neck, and that's when Boyd had to go after him. And I understand Matt Boyd tried to stick up for two teammates, Jacoby Jones and James McCann. It's just the rules of the game. The rules of the game where it gets to the point where an opposing pitcher retaliates by throwing a pitch right at an opposing batter after one of his teammates gets hit by the pitch and gets injured, for example. Chances are either both warnings, that both dugouts were given each a warning, or the pitcher might be ejected. Maybe they, I don't know if they changed the rules or something like that, but I think Major League Baseball, in my view, is no longer going to have to put up with any retaliation from either of any two teams playing in a game whatsoever, in any way, shape, or form.
Well, and we talked about this a lot this weekend in our group chat and on the Facebook page.
Yeah,
I understand where Boyd's coming from, because his guy gets hit in the mouth, but it wasn't intentional. I mean, obviously he's not trying to hit a guy in the head. Haley's not looking to hit Jacoby Jones at all in that situation, much less in the face. And Boyd does what he normally, or what most pitchers would do, which is retaliate. And I think that because the situation escalated with Sano and McCann,
yep, and Sano
that
punched.
kind of led them to eject Boyd. I think if Sano just looks at him, doesn't make a reaction, I think that Jordan Baker comes out and says, all right, you got your chance. That's enough. No more. Here comes we'll warn both benches. And everything was going to be done. But because Sano escalated the situation, that they felt they had to get Boyd out of the game simply because he was the perpetrator that started that whole incident. And thinking about it, over the weekend, I think that the case can be made for either side. But because the situation escalated to the way it did, with Sano first looking to go after Boyd, and then McCann trying to step in, and Sano throwing that punch at McCann, like you said, at that point, Sano was going to be gone regardless. And I think that the umpires probably got together and decided that if they were going to continue that game, that Matt Boyd had to leave too, simply because leaving him out there wasn't going to benefit either team. He didn't get Sano, so maybe they think that he's going to try to hit somebody else. And the fact that in that game, they hadn't given out warnings, but at the same time, there wasn't an intent to hit Jacoby Jones. And I think the Tigers probably could have picked a better guy to try to go after. I mean, I don't think you want to try to hit Miguel Sano.
Because he's one bad dude.
Well, it just doesn't make sense. Usually in that situation, if you're going to get a retaliation, you're going to go after a guy that is in equal stature. And Jacoby Jones is not the centerpiece of the Detroit Tigers lineup. Now, granted, because of the injuries, he might have a little elevated status, but Miguel Sano, for all intents and purposes, is the best hitter in that Minnesota lineup, the most productive when it comes to OPS, runs produced, and all those other statistics, even though his average isn't that great. Gets on base, hits for power when he does make contact. And I think that when the umpires saw that situation escalating, they decided to dump Boyd simply because there wasn't going to be a whole lot of benefit to leaving him in. I think Minnesota would have been rightly peeved had they left him in the game simply because of the things that went on. And I think that after that whole thing calmed down, they ejected both parties. They did hand out warnings after that, saying this was the buck stops here, so to speak, no pun intended. And that's when the game could resume a normal tone. Blaine Hardy came in on relief for Matt Boyd, did a pretty decent job, especially that's a situation where, as a reliever, you don't really expect to find yourself in. And he was able to do the job and keep the game at a manageable level. And they ended up winning that game 5-4.
When they could have blown it, thanks to K-Rod.
I mean, Blaine Hardy could have came in there unprepared and just given up all sorts of runs and hits, but he didn't. So good job by the bullpen there. But then K-Rod comes into the ninth with a 5-3 lead, gives up a home run to the pinch hitter, Jason Castro, and has a guy on first with one out. And you're looking at that and thinking, here we go again. Amazingly enough, he was able to get the next two hitters and get out of that inning, but the bullpen, shaky as it was able to navigate through 4 2/3 innings and get the win for the Tigers.
Blaine Hardy ending up with that win. Justin Wilson and Alex Wilson both pitched a scoreless inning each. They each get a hold. Kyle Ryan got a hold too, obviously. Yeah, and he was in that game just a little bit too. But it could have been worse in totality.
Yeah, and I think that when you're looking at the situation as well, it was an odd time for the retaliation. You don't want to do it, 2 games down the road or in the 8th inning or something else like that. I thought that maybe they probably, if they wanted to do something like that, that wasn't the time. I mean, Matt Boyd was obviously well in control of his pitches until then. I think if you're going to do it, you're going to do it to the first guy up in the inning, not waiting for Miguel Sano to get up. And I think also that had they done that, I don't think that the Minnesota Twins would have reacted as they did. But because they waited a batter in, that got their dander up a little bit. And like I said, with the situation escalating, the umpires decided to get rid of everybody that was involved, Boyd and Sano, and get rid of the problem right there. I think one thing that probably plays into that as well is the fact that Matt Boyd, at that point, was pitching relatively well, and all of a sudden he comes in with an obvious purpose pitch to Sano, and it didn't really leave a lot to the imagination what he was trying to do. So there's ways to do that, and I just don't think the Tigers did it the right way. And maybe you throw inside to him, maybe you try to back him off the plate, but you don't throw it way behind him.
No.
I mean, if you're gonna do something, you can try to bust him. You can try to bust him inside and get away with that a little bit more than you can when you're going to throw it to the backstop 2 feet behind him. And so Matt Boyd gets the boot, and really I think that the harm in that is that the bullpen had to work extra time to get through the rest of that game, and now you got to blow a reliever to get into the late innings, and then get through your regular rotation, your 7th, 8th, and 9th inning rotation, and that was something that I thought was of note as well, just because in a series and in a season that the bullpen had, if there was any series that they could have used some rest, it was this one, simply because of their usage over the past 16 games up to that point. So they were lucky enough to get through that bullpen and get the win, and the Twins didn't really pose a threat until the 9th inning when Francisco Rodriguez came in. So from the 5th until the 9th, the bullpen did its job and did it well.
Yeah, sometimes the bullpen comes through, doesn't it? It's come through mostly as of late, to be honest with you. The way I've been seeing it, except for Anibal Sanchez, who earlier today gave up a 2-run home run to Max Kepler. He continues to get the hell beat out of him 2 runs, 2 hits, 2 walks in 2/3 of an inning in the 8th inning. He's got to be released.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Michael Fulmer goes 7 strong innings, only gives up 2 runs,
Gets
7 strikeouts, pitches a really nice game. And at that point, it's 13-2, or sorry, it's 10-2. And you bring in Anibal Sanchez, and you're thinking, okay, maybe this guy can finally find his way through 2 innings, save the rest of the bullpen, get some rest for everybody, because that's really his only role at this point, is to get the other guys rest and eat some innings and hopefully not give up too many runs. But again, he proves his ineffectiveness, getting bashed around the yard, getting up to 2-run home run to Kepler. And Austin has really no choice but to bring in Justin Wilson to finally get out. And Justin Wilson came in and did what he's done all year, which is getting out. And then they turned it over to Joe Jimenez for the 9th, for a clean, perfect 9th with 1 strikeout. But, I mean, in a 10-2 game, you've got to have somebody in your bullpen, regardless if it's you're up 10-2 or down 10-2, that can just come in and get you through the rest of the game. And that's what Anibal Sanchez was supposed to be. Literally, when they brought him in, you're thinking, right along with Brad Osmus, hey, he's going to get us 2 innings. He might give up some runs, but hey, he'll get us through the rest of the way. But he gives up a 2-run home run to Kepler, and he didn't really show any signs of ineffectiveness. The 2 outs that he got were not exactly easy, and I think that Brad Osmus just saw that opportunity. He didn't want it to slip away. He didn't want to give the Twins any momentum, so he brings in what is his best bullpen tool, Justin Wilson, but he's got to use him for 1/3 of an inning. And, you know, with the warming up and getting ready and everything else, I mean, Justin Wilson only throws 1 pitch, but you got to get him through all his machinations and get him ready to throw 1 pitch to get 1 out. And it's just a waste of an outing for Justin Wilson. I'm glad that he was able to do it in 1 pitch, but, I mean, Justin Wilson is not supposed to be pitching in that game. I mean, you're hoping that this, I mean, especially with the big lead that they posted him too early, you're really hoping that bullpen doesn't have to work. And Brad Osmus didn't want to see any more of it, and he came out and got Sanchez. And at this point, like you said, I mean, there's nothing really redeeming about having Anibal Sanchez on that pitching staff at all. I mean, if he can't do the one job that he's supposed to do, I mean, you were hoping at the beginning of the season he could be a viable reliever and really take some of the games that the starters were not able to go too deep into, but maybe he could be the bridge guy. Then he couldn't do that, so they turned him into the mop-up guy, and he can't do that now. So, I mean, at this point, he has no role in that bullpen because he can't do any of the jobs that they've asked him to. And at this point, I know his contract is ominous. I know that they're hoping to get as much mileage as they can out of him for this year because they don't want to pay him all that money plus his buyout for next year. But you can't. It's an empty spot. There's no reason. There's nothing that he can do in the bullpen that's going to make your team any better. And there are plenty of guys that they can get that are much cheaper to do the same things he does, and probably at a more effective level. So, I mean, if this would be the perfect time to do it, especially with the off day coming up tomorrow, that they just cut ties with him and really hope that they can get somebody else to fill that void from Toledo and try to make a go of it. Because the bullpen as a whole, you look at Justin Wilson, Alex Wilson, and Joe Jimenez. I mean, Joe Jimenez's ERA doesn't look that great, but he doesn't have a large sample size. Those are your 3 guys. And then Shane Green, if he can improve, that's 4. And so, I mean, if you can really just get some mileage out of those the bullpen, if Blaine Hardy can be effective in certain spots, you know, they've got the makings of a decent bullpen. But Anibal Sanchez being in there is just crippling them. And I think that the time has come now where he has not been able to do anything to prove that he deserves to be on that pitching staff. And you know, you got to cut him loose. I know it's a hard pill to swallow with the money, but at this point, you got 2 guys right now, Victor Martinez, and we'll get into that a little bit later, and Anibal Anibal Sanchez, who are getting paid $34 million to be terrible. And you just can't have that kind of stuff on a roster and expect to get around it for a whole season. Victor Martinez still has a little bit of value, but Anibal Sanchez just doesn't have any sort of redeeming quality that would allow him to stay on that team and make an excuse for him, because he can't get guys out now. I mean, he literally is having trouble getting people out. And for a team that is still in a contending position, even though the window is closing for them, a lot of people think this is probably the last time the Tigers have an opportunity to do something with regards to a playoff berth and beyond. Anibal Sanchez has got to go. And it's a tough check to write, but it's a lot easier if you can make your team better.
Sure as hell enough. So we have 4 injuries total, including JD Martinez. We have an update on him, but we'll get into him just a little bit after we go down this list here. Jose Iglesias with a jaw injury goes on the 7-day concussion DL last Wednesday. Then Miguel Cabrera on Friday suffers a right groin strain. He's on the 10-day DL. Jacoby Jones gets hit in the mouth with a pitch, has lip lacerations with 9 stitches and he's on the 10-day DL and will undergo a CT scan additionally, as we were updated in notifications on our phones today. And now JD Martinez, with his foot injury, ran at 40 to 60% on Friday. He was okay Saturday, according to Evan Woodbury on Twitter at Evan Woodbury with 1 R. The Tigers analyst of NLive.com and NLive. He's going to run again tomorrow. And Ausmus is thinking a late April or early May return. It's already getting to the late April stages, the late April days. So we could expect JD Martinez back in the lineup in at least a few days. Buckle up, folks.
Well, yeah, and the thing is with JD Martinez is sorely as this lineup could use another bat, you don't want to bring him back too early and penalize yourself by having to put him right back on the DL. So you have to advance with caution when it comes to his injury, simply because you can't afford for him to be out any more than he's already been. So I say until he's 100% ready to go and has passed all of his tests with flying colors, whatever those tests may be, you got to leave him on the DL, simply because they cannot afford for him to be making a return trip because he came back too early to try to help the ball club. So with those injuries, for the foreseeable future, you've got Miguel Cabrera out for at least another week. And I think that probably he needs more rest than anything else, just because of the way his injuries have gone. He started out the season with a stiff back, and that's crept its way now with a strained groin. And you've got Jose Iglesias out with a possible concussion and at least a jaw injury or some other sort of injury, whether it be a concussion or something else. And now Jacoby Jones is out, and Jacoby Jones won't be back until early May. So at this point, I mean, they are playing with a AAA or middle AAA lineup. They bring up Jim Adduci from Toledo, and Jim Adduci steps right off the plane today and has a 3-for-4 game. Has a nice game, but you cannot expect him to do that on a consistent basis. And John Hicks playing at first base. Alex Avila played catcher today, started the offense off with a 2-run home run, but he is not an everyday player. So at this point, for the lineup, I mean, there's just not a whole lot there. And you got to hope that the pitching especially Justin Verlander and Jordan Zimmerman, who are supposed to be their top two pitchers. You're hoping that they can turn it around and get some strong outings, because Michael Fulmer can't do it by himself, and Matt Boyd has been doing a fine job, and Daniel Norris has been up and down. But if you can get those other two guys on board, I mean, you got to give yourself a chance to win ball games, and you're not going to get 13 runs every game from this lineup. It's just not going to happen. And you're going to have to lean on your pitching staff, especially your starters, because you know that the bullpen is pretty dodgy. You don't know what you're going to get from them. So you've got to try to give yourself some distance and really just come through some long starts from the rotation. That's what they've got to key on right now, is just getting guys into the 6th and 7th inning, and hopefully they can have a lead when they leave, because it's a real tenuous situation with both the bullpen and the lineup. So, you pose the question: what's more important right now, or what's the worst part, I guess, of the Tigers? I don't have to say their lineup, simply just because they don't have a lot of options. There's not a lot of flexibility for Brad Ausmus to make substitutions and day-to-day administrations that he normally would with a healthy lineup. And instead of getting healthier over this week, they've gotten worse. They've gotten more injuries. So he's going to have to deal with what he's got. But you hope all of those guys are able to come back in a week or so. And really, at this point, all you have to do in April, you can't win a pennant in April, but you can sure as heck lose it. And I think that right now, as long as they stay in their current spot, which is battling with Cleveland for that top spot in the AL Central, without most of their better players in the lineup, then that would be considered a victory. They don't have to be in first. They don't have to win every game, but you've got to just kind of hold the fort and get to those guys coming back, and hopefully JD Martinez, after he's able to come back, starts getting in the groove relatively quickly, and Miguel Cabrera comes back rested, and Jose Iglesias comes back and is able to play his normal defense and contribute once in a while at the plate. And you get those three guys back, and also with Jacoby Jones. If you can get those guys back in the lineup, those four guys, I mean, that's going to improve you tremendously. And then you get into June, and you start wondering about what do they need to do at the trade deadline. I mean, that's how fast the season's moved now, is you get those guys back, give them the month of May, and then you get into June, and you're starting to think about what you're going to do at the trade deadline. Because you got to make those decisions and try to find out what you can do, and maybe get a jump on the outrageous prices that usually are exacted with those July 31st trades, and see what you can hopefully pick up to improve your team. Obviously, a bullpen piece would be nice, but everybody's going to be looking for a bullpen piece. I mean, who's not? And your lineup, hopefully, you don't need to bring a big bat in or overpay to bring somebody in to replace somebody that's on the active roster that's not pulling their weight. So for the Tigers, it's just kind of hold and see what they can do, and hopefully they can stay afloat in that division. Minnesota, Kansas City, and Chicago all below them, and nobody really expects a lot from either of those teams. So if you can just make your way into June, I think that would be the tipping point right now is June 1st. Where are you at June 1st? Are you still within striking distance of the Indians? Are you starting to fade already? And that's what's going to determine what their course is for the rest of the season, especially coming up to the trade deadline.
Yep. So hopefully we don't rush Miguel Cabrera or JD Martinez or Jacoby Jones or Jose Iglesias. We need them both back 100%. Yet Brad Ausmus continues to hurry Miguel Cabrera with his back injury, and now we have to wonder now if Brad Ausmus is gonna rush Miguel Cabrera with his right groin strain. So, speaking of injuries, Victor Martinez had been battling with a hernia problem, with post hernia surgery effects, and that's part of Jeff Moss's latest article today from the Detroit Sports Rag, the Victor Martinez problem. It's about Victor Martinez still hitting cleanup, the fourth spot in the batting lineup. He's been hitting with a hernia, and then with post hernia surgery effects, while Justin Upton was recently catching on fire offensively, and Brad Ausmus still didn't do jack diddly squat with the lineup about it, because of course he had no sense of urgency as usual. Victor Martinez has a negative .5 Fangraphs WAR, F-WAR for short, Fangraphs wins above replacement ratio, a .222 batting average this season, a .286 on-base percentage, and a .524 OPS on base plus slugging percentage through 16 games played by Victor.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to have a negative WAR as a designated hitter. I mean, you've got to work to be a negative effect when your only job is to hit the baseball.
Here's another truth. Brad Ausmus still has too much faith in Victor Martinez because Brad Ausmus has known Victor Martinez as a dangerous threat historically, as we all understand. And Brad Ausmus continues to stick with him because of that, while Victor Martinez has really been digressing as of late. And it's a continuous disaster.
Well, it started off last year. I mean, he obviously was not the player that he normally was down the stretch last year, just killing the Tigers, not only because of his production, but because of where he was hitting in the lineup. And the point was that, yeah, I mean, he's another guy that he's owed money up till next year. And you have to be able to find some way to get him at least giving you some value. But when you continue to bet him fourth, and I understand the lineup as it's currently constructed is really just kind of a mix and match and hope for the best type of situation. But Victor Martinez should not be hitting fourth. There's no reason for him to hit fourth. He hits balls to the wall that he turns into singles. I mean, he simply cannot run. And with his slow start, he's not hitting for average. He's certainly not hitting for power. And out of your fourth spot, you need more than that. I mean, if you could at least put him down in the lineup and he can maybe improve his batting average. Maybe not his power numbers, but at least hitting the baseball and getting on base, you can justify him being down the lineup to 6 or 7. And hopefully you just get whatever production you can out of him. But to hit him fourth at this point of his career with what he's showing is just complete lunacy. It doesn't do the team any good. Cabrera's slow start. He's not normally a fast starter. But because they know they don't have to pitch to him, Victor Martinez was supposed to be the protection for Miguel Cabrera. And you can't protect a guy when you are hitting lasers off the wall and turning them into singles. I mean, it's just not going to do you any good. Cabrera himself is no speed merchant, but they're not going to give any pitches for him to hit if they know they can get Victor up there to roll into the shift, or at worst, he's going to end up with a single. I mean, it's just not a dangerous four-hitter. And right now, with the lineup the way it is, he still shouldn't be hitting fourth. You bump Justin Upton to fourth, you move Victor Martinez down to fifth or sixth, and you see what you can do. And when everybody gets back, JD Martinez included, Victor Martinez should be hitting no higher than sixth. Probably seventh. not going to be able to produce at a high enough level and keep the pitches away from Miguel Cabrera that he has been able to do in the past. And he's just a former shell of himself. And I don't understand why Brad Ausmus continues to bat him in that spot when it's quite obvious that he's only doing more damage than what he's contributing.
Yeah, just to be fair, mentioning the 5th, 6th, or 7th spot in the line, I would go ahead and pick 6. If I were the manager of the Tigers right now, and if I were to move Victor down in the lineup, and not to mention adding on to his laser line drives off the wall, turning them into singles, he also grounds out into the shift multiple times. And that's just no offense at all.
No, and he's not seeing the ball well either. I mean, there was a pitch not this game, but the last game, literally, in a 2-1 count, and I don't remember exactly who the pitcher was, but I was listening to the ball game on the radio at the time, and he took a 2-1 fastball on the inside half, and that's a ball that he normally just turns on and smokes. And he instead just lets it go for a called strike. And Dan Dickerson made the point that if there was a pitch that Victor Martinez was going to hit, it was that one right there. And Jim Price even said that he doesn't seem like he's picking up the ball as well as he should. He's not hitting the ball where he should when he does get a pitch to hit. I mean, he's just not there. And you can't wait for him to warm up, or you can't wait for him to improve and hope that he gets better and continue to bat him fourth. I'm all for leaving in the lineup because they don't have a ton of options, but at the same time, batting him fourth is just killing this lineup right now. And when they get everybody back, you can't be batting him fourth. When everybody's at full strength, Victor, and he shouldn't be now, but even markedly so, when they have a healthy lineup, he should be way down in the lineup. And he probably would benefit simply because he's going to have more pitches to hit. He's going to have less at-bats. He's probably not going to have as many guys in front of him on the base paths. I mean, it just makes more sense for him to be down in the lineup at this point of his career. And I don't know if it's a vanity thing with him, and Brad's tried to reason with him, and Victor says, no, I'm going to bat fourth, or if Brad Ausmus is just that myopic where he thinks that Victor Martinez should bat there because he's always done that. But it just baffles me that he's still hitting in that fourth spot, regardless of who else they have in that lineup.
Yeah, whether they have Justin Upton or Dixon Machado or Andrew Romine. I would say right now, with the injuries, you move, if I'm the manager of the Tigers, I move Victor down to the 6th spot. And then when Cabrera and Martinez return, the first two to come back, and then followed by Iglesias and Jones, I would move Victor down even further to the 7th or 8th spot, but not the 9th. I wouldn't go all the way. That would be too much.
Well, and you don't want to put a guy that can't run at the 9th spot. I mean, that's just you can't do that because your leadoff guy was designed. Your leadoff guy is going to run up his tailpipe more often than not if he's on base in the 9th spot. So I think you're correct. The 7 or 8 spot is probably the best spot for him right now when everybody's healthy. Nick Castellanos has fallen off a little bit after his good start. Still has a strong OPS, but his batting average starting to slip. He went 0 for 4 today. Was able to score 2 runs, though, simply because he was able to advance on a drop third strike and then also got on with a walk and came around to score. So he's not hitting the baseball as well, average-wise, but when he is getting on base, he's making a contribution, kind of like I talked about with Miguel Sano earlier. You can't look at just his batting average. I mean, we're past that point now in baseball where you're looking at a guy simply by his average and what he's able to produce, but out of the guys that were hitting today, literally, Victor Martinez has the lowest OPS out of any of the guys that were hitting today, and that includes Andrew Romine, Tyler Collins, and John Hicks. Now, granted, some of those guys don't have the sample size, but Andrew Romine's been playing pretty good amount of baseball. He's been out there for a while. And Tyler Collins has been out there for a fair amount, and he went 0 for 5 today. He still has a higher OPS than Victor Martinez, who went 3 for 5 today. Why are you hitting your lowest OPS hitter at the position where you should be having one of your highest, if not the highest?
Are you out of your mind?
It's just not, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, Brad Ausmus needs to read the numbers more. He needs to learn to read those intermediate statistics more, as well as the advanced statistics. And
that's been that's been the knock on him is that he just doesn't either believe in them or he chooses not to take them into account when he's making some moves.
Or the Illiches are not, and Alaville are not even allowing him, Ausmus to, whatever the case may be.
I'm sure there's some pressure. I mean, I'm sure that Chris Illich isn't calling Brad Ausmus and telling him you're going to hit Victor Martinez fourth. But I mean, kind of like we've talked about with the Red Wings and Chris Illich's ownership style, I'm sure there is some pressure to show some value to the owner because you are paying him $18 million. The same logic that they have behind Anibal Sanchez still being on this baseball team is that they're paying him $34 million combined. We have to be able to use him somewhere. And for the Tigers to continue to hit him fourth isn't doing them any favors. And you can still get value out of him. Yeah, he's not going to live up to the $18 million he's getting. But if you put him down in the lineup, at least he might be able to produce and be a valuable member of the lineup rather than really just being an anchor dropped right in the middle of those 9 guys that are trying to win you a ball game.
Yeah, and it's all baffling. It's only a matter of time. It may be a little while too, but it's only a matter of time until the Illich family sells both the Tigers and the Red Wings. As we know, according to the article from Jeff Moss earlier this year about Kelly Illich telling friends that the Wings and Tigers will be sold from the Detroit Sports Rag.
And he also, in that article, he also mentions Kristen Stewart, who right now is just pounding right-handed pitching. And they say, well, his defense is suspect. Well, that's why he would be able to DH most of the time. Defensively, they're not actually a terrible team. I mean, I understand that Andrew Romine is not your plus defender when he's playing either shortstop or center field, but he's serviceable. And he knows what to do out there. I'm not saying that he is anything great, but for what they have now, I mean, he can do the job at a basic level. But Kristen Stewart, they're not bringing him up. And it's the same argument they made with Stephen Moya, that he didn't have great defensive skills. Well, I don't care about his defensive skills. I don't really want him playing the field a whole bunch. Victor Martinez can't even do that anymore. He literally can't even play the field. I mean, I know earlier in his Tigers career, they would play him at first base. They tried to play him at catcher real early on when they had signed him, but that went by the wayside when it was proven he couldn't even do that. So they were only able to play him at first base for certain days. Cabrera, and like I said, was and they can't even get those done. And so it's just frustrating to see that they still bet Victor Martinez fourth when it's quite obvious that it's not a place for him to be at this part of his career. And I don't know if it's Brad, and like we said, I don't know if it's Brad Ausmus refusing to do so because he wants to keep Victor happy. I don't know if it's pressure from above making him do that, and he's just following orders. But I mean, there's no reason for him to be batting fourth. And you just try to, if you move him down and you can get some bonus hits out of him and maybe some production, that's the best you can hope for at this point.
At this point, yes. Also mentioning Kristen Stewart proving that he's killing right-handed pitchers. He's hitting a line of 283, 397, and 566 with 15 extra base hits against righties in 15 games. He definitely should get his ass called up and play DH.
It's Erie, so you obviously don't expect him to match that when he comes up to the big leagues, but he's 23 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The point of no return is quickly coming up with him as well, simply because that magic age of 30 that we've kind of found out in most major professional sports, that's kind of over the hill time. And with Kristen Stewart being in Erie currently, their plan wasn't to have him in the major leagues for a little bit, but the situation dictates that maybe you give him a look because there's not any other options that they have. I understand why they bring a Ducey up today, simply because they didn't want to burn Stewart, and they had a capable player who was supposed to be a short-term fill-in. But if you're looking at long-term solutions, Kristen Stewart is a person that you got to look at, and if there's a way to get him up here and get him some productive at-bats and find out what he can do at the DH spot, because it's been down the defense, because at this point, just like I've always said with the Red Wings, you don't know what you have until you see it. You've got to know what he can do. And that was the case with Stephen Moyer last year, where people thought he should get more at-bats simply to see what he could do in a larger sample size. They ended up not doing that because of his struggles at the plate and defensively. This year they DFA him. He goes through waivers, and now he's currently parked back at Toledo. But they've kind of passed on him, and so your next step is finding the next best thing, and Kristen Stewart appears to be it for now.
Now we got to look at Victor Martinez's future. We've already mentioned his lack of productivity through this point forward, but now we got to look at the future. He has one more year left in his contract, 4-year contract, $68 million. He's getting old too. He really is, and it's getting down to a point where sometime he's got to retire. His production is plummeting down the drain, and he's aging.
Well, he's not going to retire with that much money at the table. It's one of those things where professional pride only takes you so far, but those nice checks are always a lure, and he's not going to go anywhere unless there's really something that happens to him physically that he's unable to continue. So I think the Tigers are kind of stuck in that regard. But you're right. At some point, he's got to realize that his best days are well behind him. And, maybe he bows out gracefully, maybe he doesn't. But the Tigers are on the hook for it regardless. And like I said, you got to see if you can get some value from him. He's not going to be a 4-hitter and a dominant force in your lineup anymore, but you got to see what you can get out of him for the $18 million. Same thing with Anibal Sanchez. That's the only reason he's still on the roster, simply because they're paying him $16 million. And there's no other reason for him to be on that roster. Because if that was anybody else, they wouldn't be here, and they wouldn't have had that many chances. But because of his payroll figure and the length of this contract, which both of those guys are up at the end of next year, Sanchez a little bit less than Martinez, simply because Sanchez has a buyout clause for after the season. But, Victor for the foreseeable future is going to be on this ball club unless he has a catastrophic injury.
So that completes the the lowdown on the latest Victor Martinez problem article from Jeff Moss, the editor-in-chief and founder of the Detroit Sports Rag. Another excellent article published by our good friend Jeff Moss. Always does an excellent job, as always. We know that. So that leads us to the upcoming schedule. The Tigers have Monday off. That's tomorrow. Then they're back home against the Seattle Mariners, who are 8-12, last place in the AL West. They played Tuesday and Wednesday at 7:10 and Thursday at 1:10. And then they welcome in the Chicago White Sox, 8-9, third in the AL Central. That's going to be a good one. Friday at 7:10 and Saturday and Sunday at 1:10.
Well, the real storyline for that one is that Mike Pelfrey, former Tigers castoff, has joined the White Sox since then, and projections have him starting one of those games possibly Friday in that series. So the Tigers are going to have a couple of different storylines going into that. Obviously playing a division rival and hoping to have success against them, but also maybe facing one of their former teammates in Mike Pelfrey. And Mike Pelfrey was cut loose for the same reasons that we're talking about Anibal Sanchez and Victor Martinez. And that was because
yeah, definitely. Mike Pelfrey's contract was purchased by the White Sox. Buck, I'm losing you here. Buck, come in. Damn it. So we're expecting, we're experiencing technical difficulties with the Facebook Messenger call. My connection is going just fine. I'm going to close out of this Mozilla Firefox browser right here. Just 1 second here.
Here we go.
Yep. Oh, wait, you're back. Okay.
Yep. I don't know what happened there, but we're back.
All right. All right. Well, yeah, you were mentioning Mike Pelfrey now being a part of the White Sox team. His contract was purchased by the White Sox. Earlier, he was signed to a minor league contract, perhaps. So you mentioned it was projected that Mike Pelfrey will start Friday in the series opener against our Tigers.
Yeah, they talked to him 2 years ago. James Shields went on the 10-day deal.
Get close here.
To pitch Friday.
Having more difficulties. Hey, Buck, I'm not beeping anymore, but I can barely hear you.
All right, let's try this. How's that?
Awesome. So, say that last thing again.
Oh, well, the White Sox had called up Mike Pelfrey from AAA because, as you mentioned, he signed a minor league deal with them. And James Shields went on the 10-day deal, and Mike Pelfrey was called up to take his spot, which would have been Friday. for the start against the Tigers. Now, Pelfrey did start yesterday against Cleveland, and by his turn of the rotation, by virtue of how that turn goes, he would be projected to start Friday against the Tigers.
Yep, definitely true. So we're gonna look forward to Mike Pelfrey and see how he fares against the Tigers. See if he is coached and developed better with by the White Sox than by the Tigers, or if he continues to struggle and whatnot. Time will tell. Because Mike Pelfrey's career with the Tigers was awful, downright awful. But he wasn't a very good pitcher with the Minnesota Twins either. So we can tell Mike Pelfrey entering this game may not be a good pitcher for the White Sox either, unless he proves us wrong.
Well, his start Saturday didn't go exactly as planned. He went 4 1/3, gave up 4 runs, 2 of which were earned, 1 walk, 1 strikeout, and he left with the deficit, so he ended up taking the loss. Carlos Carrasco for Cleveland ended up shutting out the White Sox, for the Indians over 8 innings, and Zach McAllister came in to mop up. Cleveland ended up winning that game 7-0. Mike Pelfrey did not have a great outing. He didn't have a terrible outing. Like I mentioned, 2 of those runs unearned because of an outfield error. So take that for what you will. But you mentioned it. I mean, his career with Detroit was not one of great success. And even before the Tigers signed him, he didn't have a great success in his career with either Minnesota or when he started his career with the Mets. I mean, he just wasn't a dominating pitcher. He was supposed to be a ground ball guy that could eat innings. The problem was that he wasn't able to do much of that even at his peak effectiveness. And that move that when they signed Mike Pelfrey was widely panned by a lot of the experts simply because of the numbers. And we talked about that earlier. You got to look at some of those intermediate and advanced numbers. And Mike Pelfrey, I mean, they basically went on what he was able to do when he played against the Tigers. That's kind of where they held their logic, and it didn't serve them well. And they ended up releasing him or buying him out at the start of this year to make room for other players. And he came up from Charlotte, pitched against Cleveland last night. Didn't have a great success, didn't eat a lot of innings, only went 4 1/3. And kind of the same pattern that he had with Detroit, and even, as you mentioned, traced back to his days in Minnesota. He's just not an effective starting pitcher. He's not meant to be a top-of-the-rotation guy by any stretch of the imagination, but you'd hope you get at least 5 innings out of your 5 guy more often than not, and he wasn't able to even do that. So it'll be interesting to see when he comes back to Comerica Park as a visiting player again, what he's able to do against them this time around.
Sure enough, Friday at 7:10, wait and see approach. But still, I predicted the Tigers' offense to roll against Mike Pelfrey, even with the injuries, and Victor Martinez, even if he bats 4th. Yeah. And
you're hoping that if there's going to be anybody he can make a slight comeback against, it would be Mike Pelfrey.
Yep. If he does, yes. So, that's all Tigers talk, actually. We've covered all of it. Now, we're going to cover the Red Wings' top farm affiliate, the AHL's Grand Rapids Griffins. The Grand Rapids Griffins won Game 1 last Friday, 4-3 in overtime. Tomas Nosek scored the game-winning goal at Van Andel Arena. And then earlier today, the Griffins pulled away with 2 empty net goals to win 5-2 to go up 2-0 in the series in the Central Division semifinals. In the Western Conference quarterfinals of the AHL Calder Cup playoffs 2017, Tyler Bertuzzi in Game 2 scored 2 goals, and Axel Holmstrom, first AHL career playoff goal. So the Griffins, right now with the momentum, going into Wisconsin-Milwaukee Panther Arena for Games 3 and 4 Wednesday and Friday at 8, which will be heard on ESPN 961 in Holland and Grand Rapids and on iHeartRadio. They're going to have to get ready for a hostile environment.
Well, I mean, Milwaukee is a long-time rival of the Grand Rapids Griffins, and ever since the days of Pekka Rinne and Shea Weber being members of that club before they moved up to Nashville, and now Shea Weber with Montreal. But I remember going to a lot of those games, and Milwaukee just had a stranglehold on the Grand Rapids Griffins, especially in the playoffs, for a very long time. But the tide has turned lately. Grand Rapids swept aside the Admirals last year in the first round of the playoffs in 3 straight before losing to Cleveland, at that time Lake Erie, in the conference semifinals. And the same pattern is emerging here now with their first 2 wins of this series. Both relatively close games, obviously a game in overtime on Friday, but as you mentioned, 2 empty net goals make the score look a little bit more favorable for the Griffins in that 5-2 win today. It was a 1-goal game up until a minute to go, and these are the type of games that if you're the Griffins, you've got to win those games at home, especially the close ones, because when you go on the road, like you said, a hostile environment. They play Milwaukee a lot of times during the regular season, so they're not as intimidated or worried about that because they've had that experience before. But it's a different ball game when you go into a playoff game, especially in the NHL, in another team's home arena. And hopefully they can get the win and get some rest. They came off of a regular season ending streak where they did not play their best hockey before getting some vital players like Tyler Bertuzzi and Eric Tangradi back in the lineup. Ben Street, Robbie Russo, a lot of key pieces for them finally returning at the very end of the season after the Detroit Red Wings season was over. And hopefully now, with the roster at full strength, they can make a run deep into the Calder Cup playoffs. And before those string of injuries and the call-ups hit, people were really talking about the Grand Rapids Griffins as being a good bet to advance deep into the playoffs with the way that they were playing. And that last little stretch, I think, probably helped them simply because they got some guys some experience. You mentioned Axel Holmstrom scoring a goal today. He was part of that lineup when they were going through their struggles, and he was able to come through today. But they're going to have to lean on the guys that have been there a little bit. Some of the veterans, as you mentioned. Dan Grady had a goal today. He actually scored 25 seconds in on their first shot of the game. And it was a little bit of an uphill struggle for Milwaukee ever since then. So hopefully they can close it out on Friday and get some rest before they have to meet whoever it will be, whether it be Chicago or Charlotte, in the next round.
The Chicago Wolves or the Charlotte Checkers. Yep.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do for a team that's down 2-0 is give them a reason to have hope. And as we've seen with the Griffins before, they've come down from those deficits. They came back against the Toronto Marlies a few years back after being down 0-2. And the last thing you want to do when you have a team in that position is you don't want to give them any momentum. So a strong effort by the Griffins on Friday should put them over the top. And Milwaukee battling a couple of injuries, as well as the fact that Nashville, their parent club, advancing in the NHL playoffs is going to hurt them as well, because there's some guys up there right now contributing that had started the season in Milwaukee. notably Pontus Aberg and Kevin Fiala, who are two of the big guns on Milwaukee's team. Well, they're playing in the NHL playoffs right now. And that really takes a toll, because when you're talking about the AHL and some of the minor leagues, the parent clubs really kind of dictate what success you're going to have in the playoffs, simply because the longer they go, the less you have some of those guys available. And Nashville advancing didn't do the Milwaukee Admirals any favors. And now they're without two of their better players, and they're down 2-0 to the Grand Rapids Griffins. Conversely, the Grand Rapids Griffins parent club, the Detroit Red Wings, didn't qualify for the playoffs, so they got an influx of players back into their lineup, and right now hold that 2-0 series lead.
Yeah, and to sum it all up, I would predict the Grand Rapids Griffins to finish it off in Milwaukee. Regardless, Milwaukee's home ice advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if they don't come up with a Game 3 win, I would really think that they're able to overall, talent-wise, with the way the teams are structured currently, I just don't think Milwaukee has enough to overcome the Grand Rapids Griffins, and I think you're correct. I don't think they come back to Grand Rapids for a Game 5.
Right. So that's hockey. That's Griffins. Now we're going to transition to Pistons here.
Left sideline, 3, and he answers.
As we talked about on Talk Shoe 2 nights ago, Friday at midnight, after my in-game chat, on the post-game edition on Talk Shoe, we added the conversation of an article greeting Pistons center Boban Marjanovic. He was graded a mid-range B, which was probably fair enough, by Duncan Smith of Piston Powered. And I do agree with it. I do, because of the lack of defense and the running speed, along with what he can, a lot he can do it in its entirety, which is hitting free throws, scoring in the post, rebounding, and drawing and ones, better than Drummond and Baines combined together.
Well, I think his grade was based on what he was able to do with the time he had. So Duncan Smith didn't have a lot to work with as far as trying to give him a grade. And I think a B would be fair simply because he didn't have a chance to show any market improvement from the start of the season to the end of the season, because he really was only a major player in about 4 or 5 of those ball games.
That's right, because Stan Van Gundy didn't even play him much, and that's what caused Boban to not develop enough with his running speed or his defense. That's like I said, I pin that all on Stan Van Gundy, or most of it.
Well, yeah, I mean he's the guy that decides who plays. So it's always my mantra: you never know what you have until you see it. And I've said it with the Tigers, I've said it with the Red Wings, and I'll say it with the Pistons. I mean, Boban Marjanovic came over from San Antonio, and it was a begrudging transaction for San Antonio simply because they didn't have the salary cap space to do what they wanted to do on the roster and keep him around. Now, they would have loved to have him stay and be their third guy, be their third center, but they just didn't have the capability or the finances to do so, and so the Pistons swooped in and made him a very nice offer. And you would think, because the San Antonio Spurs couldn't keep him on their roster, and for what the usage that he got on that team from the last year in the 15-16 season on Greg Popovich's squad, you would have thought that they would have used him more, especially since the San Antonio Spurs are still one of the premier teams in the league, even though they don't have Tim Duncan anymore. They have plenty of guys who can play a good game of basketball, and Greg Popovich, probably the best coach in the NBA when it comes to maximizing talent and in-game moves. And you have Stan Van Gundy, flip side, who can't figure out where to use Boban Marjanovic. He can't figure out where to use a 7'3" guy who can create offense much better than the other two centers you have on your roster. And I think that was the frustrating part for Boban Marjanovic in trying to get a gauge on what his game really is because they didn't use him enough to find out.
Sure enough. So the article also said that Aaron Baines in particular is expected to opt out of his option, opt out of his contract. So you take away Aaron Baines, you still have Boban Marjanovic and Andre Drummond, who can still rebound and score in the post, but still can't hit free throws, unlike Boban Marjanovic. So
right. I mean, he was able to do what they wanted at a more consistent level than Andre Drummond was. Now, again, the sample size, if you play Boban as much as you're going to play Andre Drummond, he probably doesn't perform at the same levels he is now. But that's to be expected because he is somewhat still a very raw talent. I mean, this is only his second year in the NBA after playing overseas for the last 4 seasons prior till last year. So, I mean, you've got to find out what you've got in him, and they just didn't use him enough to really determine that. And I think that for next year, for the next season coming up, and Stan Van Gundy admitted it in his post-season press conference that he probably didn't use Boban enough. Well, probably you just take the word probably out. He would have been accurate. He didn't use him enough. And with the status this team is in, they're not in a position to play guys like Andre Drummond and Aaron Baines at a consistent level and leave a guy that they just signed who's got probably a higher ceiling, at least for he's got a higher ceiling than Aaron Baines. We know that. And so he should have at least been the first guy off the bench in that rotation rather than Aaron Baines. And perhaps he could have done some more when Andre Drummond was struggling a little bit. Maybe you put him in a little bit more, him being Boban. So I think that this upcoming season, there's a lot of things that the Pistons are going to be changing. I do believe that they're still going to be looking for suitors to make a trade for not only Andre Drummond but Reggie Jackson and really try to overhaul this roster to get them in a position to move forward and develop into a good, solid basketball team rather than just the miasma of mediocrity that they are right now. And I think that Boban Marjanovic getting to be in that limited space shows that there is some potential for him to be used not only more efficiently, but just more in general.
So there's the Boban Marjanovic analysis and the Stan Van Gundy analysis as well. So we got the Pistons talk out of the way. Now, transitioning to Michigan State Spartans football.
Touchdown, MSU!
We have an update on the sexual assault investigation. One of the names has been revealed just recently. The Spartans football team program has dismissed defensive tackle Austin Robertson from the school, from the football program. The football program still has 3 names in the roster to identify and punish sometime at some point later on in the off season.
Well, I mean, the Robertson, and when you talk about it being a part, I mean, Robertson's incident was completely separate in nature, but it's still the same type of behavior that they're investigating with the 3 other unnamed players as of yet. And that's been since February, where they got suspended. Robertson's incident happened much more recently, but it's the same pattern and same type of behavior that the other 3 guys were suspended for. And I think that in Robertson's case, you got to be smarter, number 1. But number 2, I think that once that did happen, there was no choice for Mark D'Antonio but to dismiss him simply because of the tenor of the investigation and nobody knowing exactly what's going on with that. Not knowing who the players are in specifics. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation that Donnie Corley and LJ Scott are two of those players. But until anybody's got any other information that's going to be released, it's just all hearsay and conjecture. And with Robertson having this very visible incident, Mark D'Antonio had no choice and did what only he could do, which was dismiss him from the team. And it just shows now with MSU going through all this that whatever happened in that investigation, they didn't immediately suspend them, and we'll find out more as the investigation continues and finally some closure is given to it. But at the same time, Robertson made himself visible, and it was really a no-brainer for Mark D'Antonio to dismiss him from the team, and at this point, just another notch in the really just a bad year and a half, or a year, I should say, for the Michigan State Spartans football program, having a very disappointing 2016 season, having the investigation against those three players in February, and now with Robertson being dismissed, he was being counted on as being a rotation guy and expanding his role, and instead he's off the team.
Unfortunately, but it goes with the territory. So, speaking of football, we transition to pro football and the Detroit Lions.
Touchdown, Detroit Lions!
There was an article from the Oakland Press, which I found earlier tonight, a few hours ago, on the Bleacher Report app, the new Bleacher Report app, headlining Detroit Lions general manager Bob Quinn prepared for everything in the NFL draft. For some reason, I see that it does not include the secondary defense being any concern whatsoever. But there were 5 highlights that were described in Quinn's press conference. And there's Brad the fanboy galley in this shitty video. But number one, anyway, he sees equal needs on both sides of the ball. Quinn says, quote, I mean, some of the moves we made on the offensive line may take one position off board early in the draft. Other than the offensive line, we're open to adding prospects and adding players to help us win. Ideally, once you get the team exactly how you want it, we're not exactly how we want it right now. We're working toward that. It's a great thing to say. It's a great thing to say I'm going to take the best player available because we have depth everywhere. But unfortunately, that's not realistic with where our roster is currently.
Well, yeah, a lot of the talk for the Lions draft centers around the fact that Eric Ebron, who has an option that the Lions still have yet to pick up, will it be picked up, or will the Lions decide to cut ties with Eric Ebron and decide to go after a tight end in the draft? It's going to depend on who's there when it's time for them to draft, as well as what they would have to do with some of the other spots. And the draft is one of those things where you have to be very sure, especially in the early rounds, that player is going to be able to be game ready and be able to fill a role. Whether that doesn't necessarily have to be a starting role, but it has to be really able to contribute at an early start of their career. You can't be drafting projects in the first round, because especially a team that faltered down the stretch and lost its first playoff game, they were 9-3 heading into week 14, and they ended up 9-7. So, I mean, you really got to make sure that this roster that has gone over has been subjected to a partial overhaul. make sure that they pick the right guys to supplement what they've already done in free agency, because they did a nice job in free agency filling some of the needs that they were able to identify. But there are still always going to be holes in any NFL roster, regardless of who you are. And I think that when they look at who they're going to pick in the first round, they have a lot of options, but it's going to depend on what they feel is their most pressing need. And right now, where they're at in the draft, order-wise, they may need to move up or be coerced to move down and get some more picks later on in the draft, depending on who they feel they can select or who's going to be available. And so I think that Bob Quinn has to be prepared either way to either A, make a trade and get some more picks and get more kicks at the can, or B, if there's a player that they really, really want and feel that they can have him fill a need, then they may have to sacrifice some picks or some players in order to move up and make sure that they get their guy.
Number 2, Quinn will be prepared to move up or down during the 3-day draft, even if he doesn't know if it will happen, but he will be ready. He said teams are checking out in general teams if he'd be interested in making a move. Quote, we kind of keep a master list of what other teams are willing to do. When we look at it early next week, you kind of hone in on the teams that you may or may not have interest in doing business with on draft weekend. Not opposed to moving up, but we need a very, very strong conviction on a player to make a move up. It's a balancing act. You try to do as much research before the draft, so you have all the information in front of you come draft weekend. So that's just the stuff that everybody. That's only the stuff that everybody should know. Just how the draft works. Number 3. Having strong prospects in the state of Michigan made some scouting last fall a little easier, and Quinn called the prospects from this state a strong class. The Lions were at Michigan's Pro Day. We had a number of Wolverines over here for our local Pro Day. Coach Jim Harbaugh and his staff doing an incredible job developing players and getting them ready for the NFL. So they have a strong class. Michigan State doesn't have as many this year, but year in and year out, they're a team that also develops pro players. We've been over there to Western Michigan a couple times, not only for the receiver, Corey Davis, but they have other prospects we've looked at. Davis is expected to go in the top 10 in the draft. The Lions, I don't know, probably like below the top 20 or so.
Well, and that kind of gets back to my point. I mean, if they really feel that there's going to be a need that they can fill, and that player's not going to be available to them, they may need to move up. I don't think that they really necessarily need to. But again, with the draft, you never know who's going to take who. I mean, you can try to get as good an idea as you want, but there's always those teams that go off the board or go against the grain, and all of a sudden there's a player that you're counting on being there, or at least a sequence of players that you're counting on that gets thrown off because of that. And that makes the draft so interesting, is simply because each team's going to have, like you said, a master list of who they want, but at the same time, how much do you covet that guy at the top of the list, or can you get by with a guy further on down? And that's the game you have to play in the draft, is you really can't tip your hand as to who you're really targeting, especially when you're picking as high as the Lions are, being a playoff team. You don't want somebody to sneak in there and grab a guy that you really, really want and not have a chance to make an offer to move down to make sure that you get him. So I think that Bob Quinn, he's in a really difficult spot in regards to there are certain guys feel are going to make their team instantly better. And for them to make a move one way or the other, whether it be up or down, you just have to balance that with you may not be able to get other guys on those lists as you progress through the draft if you're going to go up and move to get somebody that you really, really feel is going to be an instant contributor to your team. So I think that I wouldn't expect them to make a move, but you just never know in the NFL draft who's going to take who, and there very well could be something that necessitates a move from the Lions to go up and get somebody, or maybe they get a great offer from another team to move down, and they pick up some extra picks in the process, and they're able to get more guys on that list that are down there at the farther down from the top that they feel can still be contributors to the team.
And then it continues on with number 4, and those are very good points, by the way. Quinn likes the depth at running back in the draft. The Lions could use a power back, but that is not how Quinn will approach filling that position. I think you can get in trouble chasing positions based on body types and skill sets, Quinn said, quote unquote. If you're looking at running backs, you have to take the best running back. You're going to know his strengths. You're going to know his limitations in terms of catching the ball. If he's a big back that can run between tackles, or he's a sub back who can catch the ball, I don't want to get into chasing body types or specific skill sets, unquote. So what General Manager Bob Quinn is trying to do is draft another running back to try to address the running back issues, along with Amir Abdullah's health, to sum it all up.
Well, I mean, if you look at the Lions, obviously their struggles came from not being able to run the ball in between the tackles, and some of that can be derived from the fact that they didn't have a dominating offensive line, but they just couldn't get those tough yards when they really needed them. And if they're going to draft any running back, it's going to be somebody that probably can make those plays. They're going to get those tough 3 or 4 yards inside, and I don't really expect them to go after another what Bob Quinn terms as a sub back, or probably like a swing back. That Amir Abdullah already fills that role, and you're looking for kind of a 1-2 combination, because in the game of football today, even though the emphasis is clearly on passing, you still can't leave the running game neglected, and the Lions definitely showed that in their late struggles in the season, when they could not run the football for those tough yards inside, and they need somebody that could do that. Now, part of that was injuries, because there was a lot of injuries in the backfield, and the offensive line was subpar for most of the season when it came to run blocking. But again, it's going to be determined by who's available. And I think what I read into that is Bob Quinn's. I don't think he's going to be trading up to get a running back. Is the first thing I read into that. The second thing is going to also be he doesn't necessarily feel that it's a need that they can't go with somebody a little bit lower in the draft, because it's not going to be. They're not looking for a number 1 back per se. They're not looking for that guy that is going to get to 25, 30 carries a game, drafting at the spot that they are. But he feels that they probably can find somebody that, whether it be in the first, second, or third round, or maybe lower, they can get somebody that is going to be able to run between the tackles and take some of that pressure off of Matthew Stafford and the offense by making the defense respect those types of plays and giving the offense a little bit more freedom to work.
See, I was hoping that Bob Quinn would actually draft another cornerback or a safety, because keep in mind the Lions still have holes to fill in the secondary defense. So they need to draft at least one running back and at least one cornerback or safety to fill some holes in the running department and the secondary defense. And those are the 2 things you need.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the classes both of those positions, I mean, if they were going to trade up, it would be probably for one of those, simply because there's not a lot of depth to those positions in the draft. And everybody can always use another defensive back, especially because this league is more of a passing league. And you saw that the Lions also get exposed with that later on in the season. Now, again, with football, injuries are just a part of that game. They're part of any professional sport. But I think that the injuries that were happening in the defensive backfield were far less catastrophic and far less important than the fact that they didn't have a running back. I mean, they were picking up guys off the waiver wire early in the season to fill the running back spots. And the defensive backfield really, for a lot of the season, was capable, but they were exposed against some of the better teams during that last 4-game losing streak that they had, simply because they could not cover all the receivers that teams were throwing out there. And for the cornerback or safety, as you mentioned, everybody's looking for one of those. Again, I mean, if you're drafting those guys in the first round, it means that you really don't have a lot to work with on your current roster in that respect. So the Lions are going to be hard-pressed to find somebody based on how the draft is being projected to work out. But and I go back to it, it just may be the fact that somebody slips down there or teams move up and move down. And the NFL draft, as much as you want to plan it out, simply just doesn't work out for every team, because other teams may have those needs or may not want to do something to lose the spot that they're in so that they can pick up the guy that they want. And you really have to depend on some other teams to make your list work. I mean, I go back to, even Aaron Rodgers. I mean, he slipped all the way down in the first round to the Green Bay Packers, and look where he's at now. But there was a lot of teams that had to pass on him, and a lot of things had to go right for the Packers to get him. And when you talk about guys that slip that far down, there has to be a real complicated confluence of events that land you one of those talents when you're picking as a playoff team.
And then finally, number 5 consists of the Lions losing Andre Roberts to free agency. What they're looking at is Dwayne Washington, a chance to give him some kick returning time, some kick returning cardio and whatnot. Plus, they have Jace Billingsley and T.J. Jones. It's gonna be interesting to see in the preseason who's going to become the primary kick returner between Dwayne Washington, Jace Billingsley, and T.J. Jones.
Yeah, I think they've got enough to work with on their roster already. I don't think they need to go out and get somebody that specifically is the returner. It'd be nice if somebody could do that, and that's part of their skill set. But the fact that they have guys available that are ready to do that, and quite frankly, are specifically targeted for that role, I think that they have enough competition internally already that they really don't need to reach for somebody. And like I said, sometimes you just get something dropped in your lap. I mean, if there's somebody there that has that type of explosive ability, then you got to take a chance and take them. And it really depends on where you're at in the draft and who you've been able to pick up so far. And I mean, the draft is just a really interesting study in how teams think and how things change very quickly, especially when you get into the later rounds where it's a rapid fire. The 4th through the 7th round, especially on Sunday. I mean, it just really is interesting to see who gets picked and when, because at that point, when you're getting that far down, you're just picking guys off the list and really just kind of going with the best available, or the best available at that position that you want to be able to fill with whatever you draft. So I think for the return game being as minimized quarterbacks, the kicking rules, and all the other things that have really changed how that aspect of the game is played, I don't think you really need to reach for somebody that has a pretty specific role, because you're taking up a roster spot for a guy that literally might touch the ball 6-7 times a game, maybe. And so it's going to be difficult to see the Lions going up and getting somebody that has that exclusive skill, being kick returning. Again, it's always a bonus if somebody can do that. I mean, Amir Abdullah is somebody that is also capable of that. Now, I don't think he would do that simply because he's coming off an injury and they have other better candidates that they can do or to use in that role. But it's always a nice bonus when you pick up somebody that also can do those things. But I think that the competition and the level of talent they have in that competition is good enough right now. And then if they need to pick somebody up, there could be somebody out there on the waiver wire or on the free agent list down the road, especially after camp hits and teams make cuts and guys have to find a job real quick. I mean, we always see it at the end of camp where teams are cutting guys and the next day they're signing with somebody else. So it's a really tough balance to say that they don't need to pick up anybody now when teams break camp and maybe they feel they don't need a kick returner, or they feel they find somebody else that's a better option and they're made available because they've been cut.
There's always a time where the Lions have to have a sense of urgency, and Bob Quinn may just have that as of right now. So, staying focused on the NFL draft and the Detroit Lions, we're going to distinguish who they should pick versus who they will or might pick on Thursday at 8 o'clock on ESPN in the 2017 NFL Draft. Buck, do you have any analysis on who's being drafted and who the Lions should and might or will pick?
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of mock drafts. You can literally just type in NFL mock draft and have plenty of options for you for analysis and whatnot. But I think that really, when you look at it, they're really drawing around. A lot of people think that Reuben Foster's stock has dropped precipitously since the combine. He got kicked out of the combine, and then it hasn't gotten any better for him. There's some people think he might slip down to that level at 21. There's a lot predicting they'll be linebackers, depending on who's there's a couple that have him go tight end, which are really spelled in for their Detroit. So it looks like I've seen they feel linebacker, tight end linebacker. It's probably simply because they address that in free agency. Now, they didn't address necessarily starters. I feel like that there may be more pressings in the first round than a linebacker. But the other side of that coin is who's going to be available at that spot. If you're looking for defensive back, I think that they should probably go with that position. I think that they would do themselves a disservice if they weren't to go with a defensive back in the first round, simply because the talent level that's going to be available isn't going to get any better as we get down in the draft. And there's going to be plenty of cornerbacks and not so much safeties, but really cornerbacks available based on everybody's reaction at 21. And for them to skip over that to pick a linebacker, I think that would be a little bit suspect. But again, it depends on the level. If Reuben Foster's at 21, do you step on him even though he had a pretty month or so with the combine and all the other things that have been going on with him? Or do you go with more of a sure thing, with a prospect that maybe not as well known, but is still pretty solid? Some people have him taking Jarrett Davis out of Florida, and that's a name that's popped up as one of the top linebackers in the draft. But I see some guys that are being projected to go lower than the Lions are currently at 21. Guys like Quincy Wilson from Florida, Adoree Jackson from USC, and Gary Conley from Ohio State. I just think that those guys probably would be more impactful player than a linebacker, because right now, defensively, the depth is obviously lightest at that defensive back position. So the mock drafts have them going with a linebacker or perhaps a tight end, but I think the prevailing feeling is that from most people that are outside of that realm, guys like you and me, when they watch that team for 16, or actually 17 games, that quarterback is a pretty specific need, and that if somebody drops to them, like a Conley, or like even a Marlon Humphrey from Alabama, they'd be themselves a disservice by not picking them.
Right now, the Lions on NFL.com's Mock Draft Live have defensive end Charles Harris from Missouri as their 21st overall pick. And you mentioned the possible ending for Eric Ebron. The bonus highlight says in the first statement, no decision has been made on if the Lions will pick up Eric Ebron's fifth-year option. The decision must be made by May 2nd, which is 21. That's 5 days after the NFL draft, which is going to be on a Tuesday, May 2nd. So that's all we know in terms of Eric Ebron. So Charles Harris, I'm watching video on NFL.com's Mock Draft Live webpage.
Well,
he was a two-time second-team All-SEC selection back in the 2015-2016 season. 12.0 tackles for loss, 9.0 sacks in 2016. Led the team. 8.5 tackles for loss in 2015. Led the SEC. This guy's a tackling machine. 34.5 tackles for loss, 18.0 sacks in his career. Do the math.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of things that I've been looking at, they have a second rounder, so because they feel that he'd be more suited for maybe like a 3-4 outside linebacker position, especially with defensive end being a relative strength for the Detroit Lions. That seems like a reachy pick. And again, we know what they're going to do, but I think that Charles Harris at 21 would be a very big reach for them, especially with the deficiencies they have at other positions. I don't think that there's any doubt that defense is probably still their greatest position of need when you look at offense versus defense, but I think their front four and the depth they have there is probably better than average, and I would really be surprised if they went with somebody up front. I mean, it would have to be somebody that was just lights out, and I don't know if Charles Harris is what I would consider lights out as a product on the defensive line. I mean, obviously they're going to get a guy like Montard or Solomon Thomas, Jonathan Allen, other guys like that, but I mean, it would be a real stretch for them to go for somebody in a position where I feel that they have a greater strength. And again, I think defensive back's the way to go for them, but we'll see what happens in 4 days.
All right. Well, that's our distinguishment between who they should pick and who they might pick, and that's all Lions, and that's all we covered. So now we've come to the final segment where we have to answer 5 questions. Buck, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
It's time for 5 questions on the Michigan Sports Truth.
Question number 1. Does Miguel Cabrera's latest right foot strain injury hurt Tigers as bad as J.D. Martinez's injury?
I would have to say, if you had asked the question last week, I would have said no. have to say yes, and the only reason is because J.D. Martinez hadn't been in the lineup prior till Miguel Cabrera's injury. So I would say yes, simply because it's just another injury on top of all the other ones they had to endure. If it was just him, I would say not really, and I would say because they had other guys that could pick up the slack, but now there's literally nobody on that roster that can match Cabrera's consistent production, and I think that J.D. Martinez being already out of lineup just really contributes to him, his absence being not as significant as Bruce.
And not to mention, Miguel Cabrera was slowly but surely improving in his batting average and with his offensive numbers as well. And that put the cherry on top of the sundae.
Right. I mean, had J.D. Martinez been in the lineup and then back out, I would say he would probably be more of an impact, but because he has not played this year up to this point, and Cabrera leaving the lineup has put a bigger hole in an already decimated lineup. So I would say that his injury right now hurts the Tigers worse than J.D. Martinez not being able to return.
As much as I hate to say that both Miguel Cabrera and J.D. Martinez have become injury prone, I'll bet you would visualize it the same.
Yeah, I mean, J.D. Martinez last year missed time, and he's going to miss this year. I mean, he's already missed time this year. So, yeah, I mean, those guys are not exactly models of health, and you're hoping that with J.D. Martinez getting over this latest injury, that foot sprain, hopefully he's able to piece together the rest of the campaign whenever he's able to turn, and hopefully he's able to be productive. And, again, he's in a contract year too, because he's going to be a free agent coming up, and they're going to have to find some money to pay him if they decide that they want to keep him. And to your point, if he is only playing 3/4 of the season, can you afford to pay somebody top dollar to play 75% of the games? That's going to be an interesting decision coming up in the offseason.
That's true.
Next question.
Question number 2. Should the Tigers call up Christian Stewart and Victor Martinez retire?
Well, could and should are going to be two different answers. I think Victor Martinez would do himself well to retire, but with the $36 million left on the table, I doubt he would. And as I mentioned prior, short of a catastrophic injury, I think that Victor Martinez is on this roster until his contract is up. That said, I think that Christian Stewart definitely should be called up, simply because the line that they have right now is not going to be sufficient. And you don't know exactly when J.D. Martinez is going to come back. You don't know if Miguel Cabrera is going to be completely healthy when he comes back. And for a guy right now in Christian Stewart, who is 23, you've got to find out what he brings to the table sooner rather than later. I don't think that the Tigers are in a position to root on him. And I think they may want to take a lesson from when they had Steven Moya up last year, and that is you've got to find out what Christian Stewart can do. And I understand that you're going to be bringing him up from Double-A, and I understand that he's not going to perform at the same level he's been performing at with the Erie Seawolves. But I just don't think that this team can wait on somebody to get, quote-unquote, ready. And I think that they really need to rejuvenate this lineup somehow until all of those pieces get back in full. And I think this would be a great opportunity to put Christian Stewart in the lineup and find out what he's able to bring to the table. And when all those guys come back, it's really to send them back down. There's no expectation that he's going to be able to stay up after the health issues are taken care of. And heaven forbid somebody has a longer layoff. I mean, maybe J.D. Martinez has a setback, and then he can't come back until later. I mean, this seems like a prime opportunity to give a young guy a shot, just to see what he's able to bring to the table, give him some experience, and to do it at a part of the season that there's still relatively low pressure, instead of being up in the middle of a pennant race.
And to add on in terms of Victor Martinez, Brad Ausmus has continued to hit him in the cleanup spot, like Jeff Moss mentioned. You can follow Jeff Moss on Twitter at JossDSR, the founder and editor-in-chief of the Detroit Sports Ring. And it's probably going to be a while before Brad Ausmus even makes a change, any kind of change whatsoever with Victor Martinez, because Brad Ausmus continuously has too much faith in Victor Martinez, regardless his age, regardless his lack of productivity in his last 2 years.
Yeah, and that's kind of a wild card in that as well, because Brad Ausmus, if he continues to bat him in the cleanup time, it doesn't matter if he should retire or not, he's going to continue to be in that fourth spot, hamstring the Tigers lineup. And as we talked about before, Victor Martinez batting 6th or 7th on this team right now is not such a bad thing. But it is a bad thing when he's smack dab in the middle of the lineup, hitting 224 or whatever it is he's hitting, and not able to even get a simple extra base hit when he's hitting a ball to the outfield fence.
Yep. And not to mention, most importantly, Brad Ausmus has no fucking sense of urgency whatsoever. That's why Brad Ausmus should be fired regardless after this year. Because you know Brad Ausmus's lack of sense of urgency is going to get the Tigers nowhere. Not even, and they're probably not going to make the postseason again either. Again this year, like they did 2 years ago and then last year.
Well, and when you talk about the urgency, we're not advocating that he make these wild moves and just completely against the grain kind of stuff. I mean, this is simple. I mean, these are simple things that really a lot of managers, and I mentioned even on Saturday when the whole imbroglio between Matthew Boyd and Miguel Sano erupted. Brad Ausmus, after they kick out Boyd, regardless if Boyd should have came or not, I mean, other managers, John Farrell, Terry Francona, guys that have an invested attitude in their teams, I mean, you would have had to drag them off the field because Jacoby Jones gets hit, and then you're throwing out my guy for the exact same thing. And regardless of the principle, and that Boyd probably should have been ejected, is the fact that the manager has to fight for his guys. And Brad Ausmus rarely does that. And it just goes to show, in a real sense, his lack of urgency with this team. Because he simply just goes by a paint-by-numbers, day-to-day approach and has no real long-term solutions. He just simply doesn't operate that way. And you can't do that, especially with the team that they have. This is not a team that is going to be in a championship window for much longer, if they are even deep at one right now. And for him to continue to do the things that he's doing shows literally no urgency in trying to make this thing work so that he can advance to the playoffs and get his team in a position to win a championship.
In other words, not even trying, thus refusing to even trying to make things work. That's just worthless and pathetic.
You are pathetic!
And Chris Illich and Al Avila continue to have faith in him. That's just a laugher for this organization. It's pathetic.
You are pathetic!
That does not give the Tigers any sort of championship whatsoever. So,
next question.
Question number 3. Which pitching staff is more concerning for the Tigers right now? The starting rotation or their bullpen?
Well, that's a very good question, simply because of the performances we've seen through the balance of the season. And I'm going to take the unconventional approach here. I'm going to say it's the starting rotation. And the reason I say that is because right now they're the ones that have to kind of carry this team. Because the bullpen is what it is. It's not going to magically get better. There's no magic wand that they're going to wave over these guys and make them instantly better. So it's really the starter's job on a consistent basis to get through as much of the game as they can and get away with a lead. And Jordan Zimmerman and Justin Verlander have struggled early on. And I think that for the team really to do anything regardless of who's hitting where and who's coming in to make to get a save or who's coming out of the bullpen to stop a rally, the starting pitching is more important right now simply because that's who's got to really make or break this team. If you can't get consistent efforts out of the starters, you're going deep into a bullpen that is iffy at best. And the offense has proven over time that they may be able to score some runs, but it's not going to be consistent. And the starting pitchers, if they can get any sense of consistency and getting deep into games, they'll leave the pressure on that bullpen and also give the offense some room to work, knowing that their starting pitcher is going to be out there, getting them in the position to hopefully win the game.
And not to mention the bullpen is actually done a little bit better. Shane Green, can you believe his ERA has sunk all the way down to 1.80? I can't believe he's improved that well.
It doesn't feel like he's that type of pitcher as far as success goes, but he definitely has been able to do it. I think that again goes back to deployment. They're not putting him in situations where he's getting a lot of runners inherited. He's been in really high leverage situations, and he's making the most of it. He didn't look very good in the beginning of the season, and I don't think he's all the way there, but he's slowly but surely moving. The time will tell, really, as the season goes on, and as Justin Wilson inevitably will cool off. If Shane Green, who was really the eighth inning guy last year, has to step back into that role, is he going to be able to perform as he did last year?
That could be a good point in the near future. Here's another one in terms of the Tigers here.
Next question.
When will Andrew Romine, question number 4, when will Andrew Romine ever get a full day off?
Well, with the current state of the lineup, probably not anytime soon. Right. And again, he's not an everyday player, but at the same time, it's a necessity rather than luxury for him to be playing right now, just because of his versatility, position-wise. I know Brad Ausmus really has kind of taken a shine to him and has played him in some positions that don't make a lot of sense.
Before the injury,
batting and lead off the day after he hits a grand slam, and that type of stuff. I mean, right now he's just the option that they have, and he's going to have to play short for the foreseeable future. And when they start to make late game substitutions, probably move around to center field and or first base. I think Alex Avila, the last 2 games prior till today, had played some at first base, so that relieves him a little bit. But with Iglesias being out and their outfield being really, at this point, serviced by minor leaguers at best with Tyler Collins and Jim Adduci, at some point he'll have to go out there well. So I don't think that we're going to see the end of Andrew Romine as far as being in the lineup in a starting role for quite some time.
Hopefully.
Next question.
Digressing, question number 5. Is the mid-range B grade for Pistons 7'3" center sensation Boban Marjanovic fair enough from Duncan Smith of Piston Powered? And I say yes. When you
again, it goes down to sample size. What are you going to grade him on? There was very little to use in that grade. So, based on his limited performances that he was able to get off the bench and get some hard minutes, I think that a B was more than fair. We've mentioned his deficiencies as well as his abilities. And it only seems fitting that in the short times that he was used, that he was able to perform at a high level. He had a good player efficiency rating, which means that he was doing the things he was supposed to be doing on the offensive end. Defensively, he does have some deficiencies. Obviously, his foot speed and his lateral movement is not the best. But when you compare him to anybody else on the roster and guys that are in his same skill because we don't know what he can do on a long-term basis because Stan Van Gundy didn't put him in the rotation enough. So I feel it was more fair, but it also should be a catalyst for Stan Van Gundy to look at him and say, well, maybe there is a use for him more than just the guy off the bench in terms of being of centers. And hopefully with Aaron Baines not deciding to exercise his option, hopefully Boban Marjanovic will be inserted into the rotation at a higher clip next season and able to improve upon that grade and really start to develop as a low-post option for Stan Van Gundy's team.
Then and only then will we grade him some sort of A grade compared to what we're grading him, what Duncan Smith and we are grading him right now. So that's the 5-question segment for all the listeners and fans out there. If you want to answer those questions, just replay the episode and answer them in the comment bank below this episode. And that wraps up episode 261 of Spreaker's feed of the Michigan Sports Truth. I'd like to thank Buck Gino tonight and this week for chiming in with me on all the topics and discussing, recapping, and analyzing Tigers, Griffins, Pistons, the Spartans football sexual assault investigation, and the Lions in the NFL draft. You can follow Buck Gino on Twitter at BuckGino III, as in Roman numerals III. Buck Gino, thanks very much. Hopefully I'll talk to you again on Spreaker next week and talk to you on Talk Shoe again later this week.
No problem.
So,
very good.
Yep. So before we sign off, I want to remind everyone to share this episode and our entire podcast on social media. Have their friends share that as well, because I tell them that the Michigan Sports Truth podcast is in search of local advertising sponsors. If anyone has a business that's interested in sponsoring this program, you can follow Sports Radio Detroit on Twitter at Sports Radio DT, Sports Radio Det, and send them a direct message or email them at sportsradiodetroit.com in the contact section, or email its owner, Roger Castillo, at rajcast81@gmail.com. Also like their Facebook page and join their Facebook. And finally, find their podcast available on iTunes and Podbean. I'm Taylor Phillips. Follow me on Twitter at DT2Phillips and like the Michigan Sports Truth Facebook page and join its Facebook group. We'll talk to you next week on episode 262. Thanks very much for listening. TTFN. Ta for now.
Bon appétit.